Friendly good afternoon to all of you and welcome to this side event organized by the NDC Transparency Initiative. My name is Madeleine Werner and I am working as Energy Advocacy Officer for Miserio. I'm happy that all of you are here and I will accompany this panel as your moderator. We have a diverse and exciting event coming. Monitoring transparency and its impact to ambition and action within NDC will be our thematic focus. As one of our most important working principles, think globally, work nationally, we will focus on concrete country cases. So take a break from all these high-level discussions and feel welcome to dive into the world of true implementers. In regard of the Paris Agreement and its goals, it is key to produce energy from renewable sources. We know that principles like access and social justice are often only kept because of a strong involvement of civil society. It is therefore that we call for transparency within NDC, so that spaces open up in which civil society can advocate for an ambitious and climate-just action towards renewable energy systems. In the past 2 years, 6 countries investigated the implementation, action and transparency of their country's climate plans. Some insights are shared within the following video. Welcome back to Egypt after this small trip around the world. We will now have a short round of comments by my dear co-panelists. And the first one is Andrea Briatoroso, and she's working as climate justice coordinator at the association or Asociación Ambiente y Sociedad, and she's coming from Colombia. Andrea, what are your insights from the Colombian country study on NDC transparency?
Thank you. Colombia's update NDC set at the end of 2020 is an important demonstration of political will in the face of climate change. Compared to the 2015 NDC, there was a significant increase in the quality and extent of information, as well as an increase in ambition in the overall national target of the 51% reduction in GHG emission by 2030. One of the most ambitious commitments is the first step in moving Colombia towards a low-carbon development consistent with the climate crisis, and thus the commitment to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. However, the successful implementation of the NDC and its goals and not exceeding 1.5 degrees with recover structural change and great deal of articulated work with all sectors and society and the economy and the resolution of socio and environmental conflicts. Regarding the issue of participation in the NDC, the national government affirmed that it was updating through participatory process that included working groups, technical workshops, expert concepts, socialization instruments, and dialogues with differential groups, but the supports of these are not public accessible. In addition, there is a high level of ignorance of the subject at the local level, and the spaces for participation in the NDC are not clear. In terms of monitoring, the country faces many challenges due to the fact that there is little interinstitutional coordination, the information on the implementation of policy measures is scarce and not very updated. There is little clarity in the steps and processes related to monitoring progress. There are shortcomings and lack of specificity in the presentation of reports. There is no monitoring, reporting, and verification system, and greenhouse gas emission measurements are outdated. The last available information dating to 2014. Here I make clarity that they just released the last report of national emission measures before this COP, but it refers to 2018 data. Although the NDC points out the need to improve transparency, access to information, resources, and participation to advance towards the appropriation of climate change mechanisms in the country, there is still no defined plan or instrument for monitoring the implementation of the NDC, nor a clear strategy with the forms of participation and access to information. Therefore, so far, it can be said that participation and transparency are insufficient and limited. Therefore, the challenges facing the implementation of NDC are clear. Improve the availability and ease of understand of the information through symbol tools, clear language, permanent updating, and public access. Establish and strengthen a monitoring, reporting, and verification system to centralize information, unify formats, and report and compare results on NDC progress. Create citizen watchdog groups that can closely monitor NDC implementation, progress, and results. Demand from the government spaces for effective and binding participation in different moments of NDC. And additionally, to clearly and concretely define the financing of actions to be implemented, since many of them, mainly those of a territorial nature, do not have resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We are now giving the word to David Knecht. David is based in Switzerland and he's working for Fasten Action. There he is working as program officer for energy and climate justice. David, what did you learn from the Swiss case?
Thank you very much, Madeleine, for this introduction. If you could put up my slides, that would be very nice, so I can support my couple of words with these slides, with this point of view how the Swiss have implemented NDC transparency. So let's see if that functions. There we go. Next slide, please. That's perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to share how and what we have done and examined in Switzerland in terms of NDC transparency. First of all, we looked at what is actually contained in this NDC of Switzerland, and secondly, how this NDC is then translated into a legal framework in Switzerland. To continue on how the Swiss authorities report on the implementation of those climate policies and measures which are defined in this legal framework. And I can already say that I think the Swiss system has a little bit more of consistency than the one from Colombia that we just heard about. And lastly, we also examined if it's possible to actually trace back a specific project from a measure. So can we make the link from a national measure on energy to a local energy project? So can we define which community has actually enjoyed has taken advantage or could take advantage of this measure? Next slide, please. So what we found very briefly, first of all, the Swiss NDC is not participatory, and it only summarizes what has already been taken as decision. So it's not pushing for new ambition and obligations, it rather summarizes the ambition and obligations that the Swiss Parliament has already decided. So I gave it a yellow color for now. Secondly, we have a very comprehensive communication. So the communication that Switzerland prepares for the UNFCCC, which is the biannual report as of now, allows us to quite well understand the national policy framework. That's mainly two policy pieces. It's the CO2 Act and it's the Energy Act. But there are some elements missing which the communication does not report about. But nonetheless, let's give it the green color. Where we are less well prepared is then actually to know what measures or where the measures if the measures have been implemented. So information on the implementation of specific policy, let's say to foster renewable energy dissemination or maybe to insulate buildings, this type of information is available, but it's scattered among many web pages, so very hard to access, and it's inconsistent. So sometimes it's just an annual media statement, and other times you find full-fledged impact assessments, also analyzing the greenhouse gas emissions done through a specific measure. So there is room for improvement. And finally, it's really not possible to trace down a specific energy project thanks to a specific measure, and this is mainly because the information is kept confidential. I understand some reasons why this information is confidential, but nonetheless there should be a way to solve this issue and make some information available to be able to trace specific energy projects in Switzerland as well. And with the next slide, if you could change to the slide, I just want to highlight what I meant in terms of scattered information across many web pages. So these are the two main pieces, the CO2 Act and the Energy Act, and we have done a list of all the different measures on like a CO2 levy, like energy, green energy funds and so on, which are then scattered across different web pages of different ministries. Even some specific measures, they have their own web pages. So you really need some dedication and time to dig through those web pages if you want to know what actually the Swiss government has also implemented and not only promised. So there is room for improvement, and that's my next slide. What we would like to recommend concretely to Switzerland, to the Swiss authorities, is first of all to complement and complete the UNFCCC reporting. Secondly, to ensure consistency across this reporting so that the same type of information is reported for all the measures. A third point would be a single access portal so that we only have one web portal where we find all the key information from all the ministries, and be it on the level of measures, be it on the level of greenhouse gas emission inventories. And finally, to find a balanced way to reveal information, information which is now kept confidential on national measures so that we can trace it back to local energy projects and we can examine if those measures actually create positive co-benefits or potentially also produce harmful side effects and therefore need to be addressed. So this was a very short and brief overview of what we have done and come to find in Switzerland, and I'm looking forward to hear more from my colleagues about the other countries. Thanks.
Thank you, David. From Switzerland, we are now heading to Brazil, and my dear colleague Livy Gabasse, working for INESC, the Institute of Socio-Economic Studies, is now presenting the case study. As policy advisor, she has an amazing understanding of the policy processes in her country. Livy, what is your highlight of the Brazil NDC transparency study?
Thank you. Now, before I answer your question, I just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page in what we are talking about here. NDCs are the fundamental pinnacle in which the Paris Agreement is being translated into national policies and national will. And the fact that we don't have enough information about NDCs in all these 6 different countries, and we don't have formal instances of participation to make sure that we can track and implement NDCs, it's a huge problem. It's a very big problem that we need to assess urgently here at COP, but also at our local governments and national governments, because the NDCs are fundamental in making sure we have the Paris Agreement, and I don't see enough of that being discussed here at COP. So starting with the Brazilian case, just having a little context, Brazil has one of the cleanest energy matrix in the world, mostly through hydropower, but we have been using this as an excuse to foment and to expand our fossil fuel energy in the matrix. So in the last 10 years, there was a 5% increase in fossil fuels in our energy matrix. And we are, since the discovery of Pre-Sal, that is a big reservoir of oil in Brazil, since then we have been expanding and producing more and more oil and contributing globally to emissions, because we are exporting crude oil more and more. So we are now the 9th biggest producer of oil in Brazil, and our plans is for 2030 to be the 4th. So we'll be becoming this big global player in emissions in a country that could be a leader in the transition, a leader in the climate negotiations. And we talk a lot about the Amazon and deforestation, but we talk very little in Brazil about oil, about Petrobras, and about what we've been doing with the energy matrix so far. So in terms of our NDC, there is a huge lack of ambition. Most of our targets for renewables in the matrix, we already accomplished them. So we don't have any big goals for expansion of renewables. There has been a rise in renewables, but the rise in fuels has been bigger, as I said before. And that's why transparency is so important. We need to make sure that we understand Brazilians and NDCs, which policies are being implemented. And unfortunately, we don't have enough information in Brazilian websites to make sure that we know exactly what the Brazilian government has been doing. We don't have an MVR system in place. The government keeps saying that they are waiting for the UN to organize the transparency framework, and then we're gonna have, but then it's been years and we don't have this information in one website. There is one website, but it's down, so we don't have any information right now. And this is not, unfortunately, this is not Brazil, as we're gonna see. Most of the countries don't have available, easy access to information about NDC implementation. In terms of participation, there has been bigger spaces for participation in Brazil in the last decades. So we talked in the video about the Forum for Climate Change. It used to be big. Now it has totally been wiped out and weakened. And now we don't see as an institution that legitimizes civil society participation in Brazil. We also have the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change and Green Growth. That is the institution that is supposed to be monitoring NDC in Brazil. They used to have some form of social participation, but this has been also weakened. It's important to understand that in the current Bolsonaro government in Brazil, 75% of all instances of participation have been weakened or wiped out. So this is the policy for participation in Brazil now. We are hopeful for the new government, of course, but we have this challenge of the new government, of Lula's government, understanding that we need to stop pushing for fossil, we need to stop pushing for oil and stop pushing for gas, and understanding, of course, that our hydro also have big problems, because we have big hydro that harms communities, that harms ecosystems. We have a lot of hydro in the Amazon, and the plan is to expand that. So we are hopeful. But we are also aware that this government won't save anything, so we need social participation to make sure that our NDCs are being implemented. So our few recommendations for the government is that this interministerial committee that monitors NDC in Brazil, it has to define a formal instance for social participation in the construction of Brazilian NDCs and the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We need a broad listening, a process of listening for specialists, for social participation, for the construction of the National Strategy for Climate Neutrality, that is our official energy policy. And of course, we need civil society organizations. We need us and Brazilian organizations to build a proposal for what the enhanced transparency structure could be, our ETF could be, of course, based on the lines of the UNFCCC, but we cannot rely solely on what the UN is doing. We need to organize our own ETF system, our own MVR system that takes into account the specificities of Brazil, and of course, make sure that everybody is on the same page and participation in the monitoring of NDCs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Livy. From Latin America, we are now heading to the African continent. And here we have Moïse Zanou, who is based in Burkina Faso. And he's joined this panel as representative of his organization, CESAO AI. There he is coordinating the Burkina Faso NDC Transparency Initiative branch. Moïse, what is the role of NDC in promoting renewable energies?
Okay, thank you, Madeleine. Okay, Burkina Faso has made many actions in fight climate change. Took 2 NDC, development and submission, but many actions remain to be made in the energy sector. According to Burkina Faso, further communication, this sector is the second largest entity of greenhouse gases emission. To reverse this trend, Burkina Faso has undertaken to measure renewable energy in NDC implementation and as action we can see. Reducing fossil fuel subsidy by subsidizing renewable energy investment. To the NDC implementation, Burkina Faso has also carried out several solar projects to reduce the use of fossil fuel. For example, the implementation of the current NDC should allow the realization of about 15 solar projects in the unconditional scenario. The NDC implementation contributes also to fundraising in renewable energy favor in the conditional scenario. At this level, funding is being sought for the implementation of 7 renewable energy projects within the framework of the second NDC. These various actions should contribute to increasing the share of renewable energy in Burkina Faso energy mix to 15% by 2025. This can be more in the action of the private sector and CSO are counted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moïse, and thank you all for these rich contributions. I think we all learned that insufficient information, that poor reporting, lack of ambition, one-sided policy instrument, poor or inconsistent implementations are challenging NDCs. And my dear colleagues have just identified many of these challenges that NDCs experience in practice. Instead of leading forward and being innovators in the expansion of decentralized renewable energy systems, countries often block development opportunities and the expansion of renewable energy systems. The results of the studies, as well as the report of Working Group 3 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, clearly showed that the NDC are not sufficient. We have now heard that 1.5 degrees is not only at risk on paper, but in particular in the implementation, because this is inadequate. The lack of transparency and participation is trampling on human rights and hampering the expansion of good energy for all. We are well aware of the connection between ambition, participation, and action, and therefore we conclude, after these interventions, when you don't involve us, things get messed up. We are now going to watch a short video presenting cases of energy projects being implemented without participation. And then Ricardo Baitello, project manager of the Instituto de Energía y Medio Ambiente, is taking us with him to the ground, so where implementation is happening.
Sou Cineia do Vale, do povo Apixana, sou gestora ambiental, coordeno o Departamento de Gestão Territorial e Ambiental do Conselho Indígena de Roraima e estou aí nessa caminhada de incidências sobre esse tema de mudança climática. Também me especializei um pouco nessa questão de percepção dos povos indígenas em mudanças climáticas. Vamos falar de um tema bem importante para os povos indígenas e também para o país, que é o Brasil. Nós vamos falar de NDCs. Isso tudo foi acordado, né, na COP que aconteceu lá em Paris. Então, por isso fala o Acordo de Paris, né? E o Brasil tem as metas para cumprir dentro das NDCs, instituída para o Brasil e assinada como um acordo. Mas sabemos que durante esses 4 anos a gente não viu muito ser cumprido aquilo que foi assinado, até por falta, né, de colocar isso em políticas públicas para que de verdade isso fosse feito, né, de uma forma que a gente conseguisse visualizar. Então, quando a gente fala das metas do Brasil para 2025, que agora é 2030 e vai para 2050, a gente vê que os acordos eles não estão sendo muito levados a sério, né? Então, por isso a nossa preocupação, como vai ser para os próximos 4 anos, como a gente vai ver tudo isso ser cumprido de verdade, né, dentro das políticas públicas. E aí é uma preocupação porque os espaços que nós tínhamos de incidência, todos eles foram, na verdade, retirados. E agora não temos mais os espaços de incidência e a gente busca novamente ter esses espaços, porque é um espaço onde a gente consegue acompanhar se realmente está sendo cumprido tudo o que está sendo pactuado, que está sendo assinado. E sem esses espaços fica muito difícil a gente acompanhar o que o Brasil está ou não, né, cumprindo como um acordo que está sendo assinado e que envolve povos indígenas. Porque se a gente fala, né, de redução de emissões, se a gente fala, né, que o Brasil precisa cumprir as metas, a gente precisa ter realmente uma barreira para a questão do desmatamento, a gente precisa ter barreira para a questão da queimada. E se a gente não tiver isso muito claro, a gente vai ver novamente o Código Florestal sendo mexido. Além desses espaços que precisam ser retomados de incidência dos povos indígenas e comunidades tradicionais no Brasil, a gente precisa ter mecanismos claros, né, que vão ser implementados nas comunidades dos recursos que estão aí colocados para que sejam, né, de apoio ou que sejam para incidência, mas são recursos anunciados e muitos recursos anunciados nas COP. Como isso vai entrar no Brasil? Quais são os mecanismos que vão ser, né, oferecidos para que os povos indígenas tenham acesso a esses recursos? Porque isso vem fortalecer os que os povos indígenas já fazem, que é a questão, né, da sustentabilidade, da manutenção das florestas, e a gente precisa ter o direito dos povos indígenas garantido. Para isso, a gente precisa desses recursos e eles precisam ter mecanismos certos que possam chegar aos povos indígenas, né? A gente hoje não tem uma clareza desses recursos e nós precisamos ter isso garantido, né? Então, eu acho que é uma das questões que a gente espera para os próximos 4 anos, que o Brasil cumpra suas metas.
Para nós é uma preocupação muito grande que a nossa bacia Juruena, né? Que a gente tanto cuida e tanto protege com unhas e dentes, porque ali está a nossa sobrevivência, o nosso processo histórico, a nossa espiritualidade com as cachoeiras, a nossa ancestralidade. As águas vai acabar porque fecha tudo, então o rio fica seco, os nossos peixes vai ficar poluídos, os nossos peixes vai acabar, os nossos tracajá não vai ter mais, não vamos ter limite para ir lá buscar, né? O povo Apiacá tem o seu ritual do tracajá, o povo Riquibaxa tem a coleta das conchas para fazer o colar de casamento, então vai sumir dessas matérias que tem no rio, nós não vamos colher mais. Também a gente pensa que as hidrelétricas não é solução para mudanças climáticas, porque a gente já percebe que a gente está sofrendo muito e também eles têm outros meios de estar buscando essa solução sem estar destruindo os nossos saltos sagrados. Uma coisa imaterial que tem nos nossos territórios, se for destruído, nós ficaremos doentes, porque nós não teremos mais aquela força de lutar e que nem destruir a nossa terra, né? Então, destruição de terra para nós é destruindo a nós mesmos, nós nos matando, nos machucando, derramando o nosso sangue.
Las energías comunitarias son la posibilidad de construir una verdadera transición energética.
Luego a la caja número 3 y de ahí pasa aquí al biodigestor, que es esto.
El centro de la discusión de la transición energética está en poder tomar el control sobre la energía y poder tomar control sobre las decisiones que atañen a la energía.
Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you everyone. It's great to share experiences from the NDC process. Unfortunately, we don't have good news to share, not only in Brazil, but we see that it's a common trend that we are lagging behind what should be delivered and what should be reported, both in terms of information, transparency, and ambition. So I brought a few points just to complement what Levy said about the Brazilian NDC. And the other point that was mentioned by the people interviewed in the video is that Brazil in the last 4 years decided to make the NDC a single number, which is really bad. So the sectoral commitments, they have been merged. So instead of Brazil having a commitment for energy, electricity, land use and agriculture, it's a single number, and this is really bad because even, let's suppose Brazil was doing a good job on deforestation, this could hide the advance of fossil fuels in the electricity sector, which unfortunately also happened. So Brazil didn't do a good job over the last 4 years, both in terms of deforestation and also in terms of hiring more fossil plants, gas plants, and coal plants. So this is part of the picture. The other elements about the NDC is definitely the good news that we could share is we are having a rise in solar energy in Brazil, very consistent since the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can see, Brazil has a number of isolated and remote communities, and this amounts to more than approximately 1 million people without energy access. So this means we have two different scenarios in Brazil. One, the integrated grid, which is we have an integrated system from south until northeast, where most of the population is, and this grid is mostly renewable, as you might have seen in the Brazilian pavilion, 85% renewable when we talk about electricity. But on the other hand, we have the other part of the country that is mostly the Amazon, where the forest is, and where the isolated communities are, and unfortunately this other matrix relies heavily on fossil fuels, on distributed fossil fuel diesel generation. So talking about the energy transition, I think it's important that Brazil is able to leapfrog, not only to include those people in the transition, make them part of the process. Those people they are saving the forest, as we are claiming here. Even Lula said in different words, and Marina, our potential future energy minister, and they are part of the new bioeconomy production that is going to happen. So I think it's very important that those communities, they have decent access to electricity, and this electricity comes from clean fuel, from clean sources. As a last point, the other last point of concern is that when we talk about NDC, as Livy mentioned, we also talk about hydro, but it's important to mention that hydro in Brazil also partly depends on methane emissions. So when we're talking about big hydros, we talk about reservoirs, and those reservoirs, they in many situations, especially in the north, especially when you build dams in the forest, this means methane emissions that are not accounted in the NDC. So we need to be very careful when we talk about renewables, taking care of this number and being able to make Brazil attend this general number. So I think those are the recommendations. As you might have realized, the civil society in Brazil is indeed hopeful with what we have been living today, the first Lula's first pronouncement, international pronouncement. So we hope we can turn things around and make a different process and have a different level of ambition and transparency in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think turn it around is a good introduction to the solution side we are now looking at. And here I welcome Tatiana Ruhr, who is coordinator at Sensat Aqua Viva, and she will introduce us to some solutions that were pointed out in the studies and in the ground experiences. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good day for everyone. In this brief presentation, I would like to talk about the role of the community energy and its importance in addressing the climate crisis and advanced a just energy transition. We start from the premise that the energy transition is a file in dispute and which different views on the transition are confronted. Our proposal is based on the premise that a just energy transition requires a cultural change that transforms our way of life. But what do we mean by community energies? We understand them an energy process carried out not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. They are energy projects implemented by communities who decide to recover and take control of energy. In this way, these communities reduce dependence on fossil fuels, decentralized and relocated energy generation, and democratized energy. I have some slides to show some experience of energy communities, and you can move the next one, please. Next one, yeah, this is the example in Germany. Next one, please. Yeah, different form to people organize it to produce energy, the informal and informal form of organization continues. Next one. Next one, please. And in this perspective, Sensat Agua Viva together with other organizations such as Comunidades Zeta, Fundaexpresión, Colectivo de Reservas Campesinas y Comunitarias de Santander, had been promoting for years a training process called a School of Peasant Community Technicians in Alternative Energies. Please move the other one, please. Yeah. And in which the practical initiatives that are built and the way they are implementing rethink and redefine the relationship with energy and with nature. Its precepts are transformation is cultural, energy is not only electricity, participation and democracy are essential for a new energy system. Energy generation must be decentralized and regulated. Energy cannot be a commodity, and its base are learning and sharing knowledge and learning by doing. In this sense, the school works on issues such as creating capacities in local people for the management of community energy, promoting community energy that solve field needs of the community, and addressing energy efficient problems, and overcome energy wasted by producing and consuming energy that is not needed. And in this way, community energies can be understood as a serious action that can be applied in daily life to favor the creation of the definitive living condition and activities that are friendly to all forms of life present in the planet. In our experience, we have grouped the diversity of community energies in energy harvest to facilitate their implementation with an integral approach. Next one, please. Next one. And so far, the ongoing harvests are those of sound, water, new relation, and human energy. A key aspect of this grouping is that not all available energy must be installed at the same time. It is gradual, dynamic, and dialectical process in which the installation, the one leads to the other and to its continuous improvement under the management of local community. The experience implementing are multiple and diverse. Please, next one. Busy machine, photovoltaic system, solar dehydrator, good energy crops, wooded forests, biodigester, local consumption, agroecological production, micro power plants, sustainable mobility, water collection system, among others. All of them have the common denominator of reducing greenhouse gas emission, guaranteed access to clean and autonomous energy, reducing public spending on health care, and dignify life in the country and in the city, on the countryside and in the city. Finally, next one, please. Sensat, with other organizations, promotes the virtual exhibition, Latin American exhibition of just energy transition, which showcase community experience in Latin America that work in this sense. In these 3 years, more than 80 experience from all over the region has been registered in our experience and in our exhibition. And I would like to show some of this experience to find in my presentation, please, next one. This is the case of Puerto Rico, Casa Pueblo. It's a very interesting experience to try to create a solar town. Next one, please. This is the experience in Guatemala with Colectivo Madre Selva and Mayas communities. Next one, please. This is the experience in Colombia with Red Biocol to use the waste to produce gas and produce electricity and produce fertilizers. Next one, please. This is other interesting experience. Is the Asprosic in the north of our country. And next one, please. Thank you very much.
Wow. We had some very, very great interventions. And as you realized, we spoke a lot about transparency and participation and about energy. And now it's your turn to participate in this panel in asking your questions to all our experts and to give them, by this means, your energy and your perspectives about everything. When you would like to have the word, I'm passing the microphone to you and you can ask a question. Just raise your hand.
Hi everyone, my name is David Munene. I'm with the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa. Thank you very much for the presentations on the NDCs. Since the NDCs were launched as the mechanism through which national governments contribute to the realization of the goals of the Paris Agreement, one of the biggest challenges we had, especially within our continent, is that the first ones were done in such a hurried manner. And in fact, we had instances where some countries consulted expertise to develop NDCs for them, so they were not realistic in our case. So my question is, for those especially from the Global South, what are the successes you have registered with the NDCs? Because as civil society actors, sometimes we get too focused on what didn't work right, and sometimes we forget to motivate ourselves and in the process motivate the governments in terms of registering the success stories that they've had. Number two, some of the NDCs that were developed looked very nice until you got to the closing clause where they say, for us to be able to achieve all that we have put, we need a budget, say, of $35 billion in the next 4 years. But then they say we have only raised about 7%. How I interpreted that is that we are not able to do 93% of what we have said because we cannot finance it. How do we finance the deficits and, well, one, remain realistic? Ricardo, perhaps you might know this. I've seen your presentation. How do we finance this deficit, remain ambitious and realistic at the same time as to what we can do? Thank you.
Ricardo, would you like to answer the second question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I can start. I think it's for the entire panel. What I would say in terms of Brazil, and that Livy mentioned in her presentation, is that as well as in other countries, the ambition was low. So the NDC that was set was, you can say that was mostly a business as usual, both for deforestation and for renewable energies. Marginally improve what was already in place. And what I can say from the experience, especially from wind and solar, being very skeptical is that development is definitely a good story when we talk about Brazil. It is a different story because wind happened in the Northeast. That was a region that imported a lot of energy and started to export energy. And solar was a bit more spread out and focused on distributed generation, more for urban environments and small scale. Both of those markets, they were already moving before the NDC. So being very realistic, I don't see the NDC having contributed to accelerate that process. Much more the government taking advantage of the revolution or the change that was taking place. This is one thing. For deforestation, this is not my area, but there are definitely good examples in the past 10 years of governments and municipalities that realized that it was positive to fight deforestation and have different activities. So I'm sorry, I'm not answering really your question, but in the Global South, things sometimes happen by accident, and I would say that Brazilian is a climate champion partly by accident. I'm not a representative from the government, so I can say that. So we are proud of what we achieved, but we can be skeptical also about that. Thank you.
Is there someone who wishes to add to this or to the first question? One moment. I think we have another answer. Yeah.
Maybe I think now you can hear me. Yes. I think the question you raised, I think this is a real problem we had with the first round of NDC, that many of them were actually developed by consultancies and not in a consorted way in the country itself. So the ministries weren't even aware of what they actually agreed. Right, so this is a big issue, I think, in the implementation of NDC. Switzerland hasn't done it this way. I said it before, they did it the other way. They just wrote in the NDC what they already agreed to before. I don't think that's the ideal way either. I think it should be a consulted way of producing NDCs with the civil society and private sector and other relevant stakeholders of a country to develop NDCs and also make very clear what are then the financial requirements and which of those can be implemented. And then usually you have this part like which are the conditional targets, right? The unconditional ones, you do it anyways, and the conditional ones which are depending on the international financing. And there I think the Global North has a very big obligation to come up with innovative ways and with ambitious ways of producing a financial package in the next years, in the next COPs, so that these financial gaps can be closed.
Hello.
Thank you very much. David, thank you. I think in a way you responded to a question I wanted to ask in relation to what he talked about. He mentioned the civil societies. We tend to be like two ways, or at the other side, to find position with the government. But I wanted to know a little concretely, from Brazil, you gave us some sort of a model, and also from Burkina Faso, but concretely, towards the success of the implementation, leave aside the funding part of it, but as a civil societies, what is our position? What concretely can we do to implement the process of the implementation to realize success? We have talked a lot about some of the challenges, you mentioned the funding, but as civil societies, aside from what we do in terms of our engagement, what concretely can we do? I would like to really get this, if I could have concretely, what can we do? Yeah.
Levi, would you like to answer, or someone else?
I can answer a little. I think Tatiana's presentation was, I think, the answer to your question. I think when we make sure we have participation for the monitoring of NDC, that means like having a say in the government bodies that are monitoring NDCs, we can think of community-based solutions for energy expansion and for energy transitions. What she showed us is that there are possibilities of making sure that the communities not only are not harmed, but that the energy expansion makes sense to them, and that they are doing something that are not harmful, are helpful for them. So In Brazil, what we have is those big hydros that come in the Amazon and make a huge deficit to people, and then the energy doesn't even get to them. The energy is not for them. So they do these big hydros, and then the energy goes to the rich states of Brazil. So what we need, and then the people from the Amazon receive energy by gas and diesel and very harmful for the environment ways. So what we need is first to make sure that we have the data. I think this is very important. And this was very interesting because both of the 6 countries, the 2 that have the best transparency are Burkina Faso and Israel. Switzerland also have big results in terms of transparency, but the information is more scattered. But Israel and Burkina Faso have like one website that you can go and see, look, this is the NDC, this is the policies for adaptation, these are the policies for mitigation, this is our targets. So I think that's point number 1. We need to like have one place that it's easily accessible, and then with the data we can start building social participation mechanisms to make sure that we are not using energy project and energy production to harm communities, and just to make sure that we have more and more energy. And of course, think of community-based solutions. I think that's my answer.
Wow, thank you. Great answer. Ricardo?
Very quick one, and thank you for the question. In terms of engagement and advocacy, 2 other initiatives that I think work well in terms of, let's say, a positive provocation. In Brazil, the civil society launched a shadow NDC months before the government put out their own. So this was interesting to make sure that civil society was well informed and was well aware of the Brazilian potential to reduce emissions, and to make sure that the government would at least be a little bit more ambitious on their targets. And also speaking about targets for the future, civil society and the academy, they launched, at least in Brazil, a 2050 plan was launched 14 years before the official government 2050 plan. So we launched it in 2006 and 2007, and the first 2050 plan from Brazil came out only in 2020. So there was a lot of discussion already, and then the positive outcome is that after not only 1, but every 3 to 4 years, a new plan coming from civil society, the government had the responsibility to be more ambitious, and they were. So it was a good thing in the end. They were more ambitious on wind and solar targets than our own. So I think, at least in our experience, it proved to be a good challenge between parties.
Moise, would you like to add something?
Okay, thank you. If we want data of a civil society effectively contribute in the NDC implementation, it's very important to associate this society in all of NDC process. Because in Burkina Faso, the civil societies are not associated in the NDC development. It is difficult to count many actions that are implemented by this society. Though it is very important to associate this society in all process for the NDC development, implementation, management, and evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Moise. Tatiana?
Okay, I will try to talk in English, but if I need help, Libby, help me. Okay, no, it's, I show you how people try to solve the situation related with energy, related with the waste, related with a lot of problem, local problem, because the government don't resolve the situation, and people hate the control of their life, and the energy, water, most of the water in Colombia, most of the aqueductos is, the water is a communitary form to management in Colombia. And in a case of energy, people start to work in this sense. And we have a lot of problem because in our case, the law don't permit this experience can work legally or have a support or for instance, produce energy to all the community. It's not possible because it's only possible to produce for yourself, yeah? And last week, we prepared a audiencia pública. I don't know, how do you say audiencia?
Public hearing.
Public hearing in a Congress. In a Congress, thank you, Libby. In a Congress, to discuss with the Congress how people can produce energy, how people can produce energy, but in a case of the energy communities, the solution is not only to produce energy. In some case, for instance, biodigester, it's not only to produce energy, it's to produce fertilizer, it's to solve the problem with the waste, it's to solve the problem with the pollution, and how the law conceive this solution in the integral or holistic perspective, yeah. And we need to pressure the government, pressure the Congress, but especially propose solution, because the solution are in the people, yeah. Solution are people build every day solution and resolve their problems. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Do we have comments? Perhaps there are NDC experts in our panel who would like to sit and complement what was just said. Is there any more contributions? Okay, great. I think then I say a huge thank you to all our panelists. You did a great job. I think it got really clear what transparency means and why it is so important for the NDCs, and especially for designing decentralized and participatory energy systems. I thank you for listening to our panel. Yeah, and I now wish you a very nice evening, and yeah, enjoy.